immediately within a day or so and them start working together. You know what? Even if they weren't the final answer, what a great opportunity to empower our members to talk and work together and see if they can make headway. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, would you be kind enough to tell both sides how much time remains?
The gentleman from Florida has 12.5 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Texas has 11.5 minutes remaining.
I thank the Speaker. At this time, I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlewoman and appropriator supreme, my good friend, Ms. Nita Lloyd from New York.
Gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, a quick review of the facts makes clear that Republicans are revising history when they claim Democrats refused to negotiate. A headline yesterday from National Journal sums it up. 19 times Democrats tried to negotiate with Republicans. The GOP's biggest talking point of the shutdown is only true if you ignore everything that has happened before last week, end quote. House Republicans' failure to negotiate includes their leadership walked out of negotiations last December, ignoring the President's $4 trillion deficit reduction plan, refusing for months to negotiate on the budget with the Senate, and now denying the House a vote to end the shutdown after Democrats agreed to their spending levels. Of course we will work with you, my friends, on honest efforts. President Obama signed a bipartisan $2.5 trillion deficit reduction law, and the deficit today is half of what it was in 2009. We are willing partners who will compromise, but to suggest that we need a special committee to tell us what we already know is just not sincere. This bill is an attempt to shift blame for this shutdown. Speaker Boehner should stop trying to find somebody else to do his job. He can end the shutdown today by allowing a vote on the Republican-written Senate-passed CR, which would get a majority vote in the House and be signed by the President. Reopen the government. Do not jeopardize the full faith and credit of the United States. Stop wasting time on political stunts like this bill while Americans suffer. Vote no.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. Gentleman from Florida reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would thankfully acknowledge the floor of the House of Representatives here for voting on several very, very important items that allow those employees that today might not be at work. We've asked that they come back to work, and it was passed here. Those in food and drug security, those in Head Start, those in National Emergency Disaster Recovery, those in the NIH, and those in national parks. These are an example of the ideas that have come forth from votes on this floor, and soon to come intelligence, border security, Native Americans and Alaskan health care, national weather monitoring, nuclear weapons security, and nutrition assistance for women and children. But we've been told...
Would the gentleman yield for a question?
I would yield to the gentleman.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I put to you most sincerely, do you not feel that by cherry-picking what it is that you want to do with these rifle shots, that it is causing morale problems in the rest of the government? Let's assume you have 150 that you're going to do. And the group that would be going back to work the latest would be sometime week after next or sometime 2 weeks from there.
Yeah.
At the bottom.
Reclaiming my time.
Do you not feel the morale problem?
Is recognized.
Yes.
I would like to answer the gentleman.
For you.
Yeah, and I appreciate the gentleman for asking. My dear friend very respectfully has asked a good question. As a matter of fact, we'd like to move forward with all 150 as quickly as possible. What we'd like to do is move through these, and we've got them now. They're lined up to our colleagues on the other side of the Capitol, but they don't want to do that. So why would I move forward if they don't want to do that? Why would we move forward if they do not actually really want to open up the government except under their terms? We believe that they have not addressed the underlying problems. Number one, what is happening with this thing called Obamacare, and secondly, with the debt. And we're adding debt as we speak. We've gone from 9 to 17 trillion in just a few short years. We have been working with the President. We have been doing things in the 3 years that Republicans have been back in the majority, and we're trying to correct the errors of the past. That's why we're here today. The gentleman asked a good question. Wouldn't it be a good thing to get through our list of 150? And I would say, the gentleman, we've already done some, and we'll keep doing them. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
In the vernacular, they just say, bring it. Put all 150 of them down here, and we'd have a clean CR. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield to one of the most distinguished members that has served in the House of Representatives, my good friend, the minority whip of my party, 4 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, who may very well answer that question that I asked about morale.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. As the gentleman pointed out, the morale is low for approximately 315 million people who call America home. Low because they see a dysfunctional board of directors of their country. Low because they are anguished about the inability to come to grips with reality. I want to tell my friend, Mr. Speaker, the chairman of the Rules Committee, we said yes. You sent us a bill to the United States Senate, which we control, and you said, let us open government. And we will open it on the condition that we cap spending at $986 billion. Now, you also put another piece on that bill which said we ought to defund Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, as we call it. I venture to say that close to 90, maybe even 100% on your side of the aisle, Mr. Chairman, I say to him, Mr. Speaker, didn't think that was going to happen. They sent it because they feel strongly, Mr. Speaker, about that. I understand that. I have strong feelings myself. Now, the gentleman from my colleague from Maryland, I hope is going to use the analogy about vetoing the debt limit, because it's a good one. But I will tell my friend, the Senate said yes, and sent it back here. We could open government this evening if only you would accept what you suggested. If only you would say, yes, you agreed with our number. There was no negotiation. There was no compromise on our side. There was a saying to you, we want to keep government open, so yes. Our Republican colleagues in the House of Representatives, the Senate said, Mr. Speaker, we will take your number. America needs to know that we have said yes to the number that you suggested. I don't like your number. I think it's not good for America, Mr. Speaker. I think it's not good for our national security, for our economy, or for the morale of the American people long term. Having said that, I want government open. So we have said yes to your number. We didn't negotiate. We'll say, we'll take what you propose. Mr. Speaker, I hope every American understands that when one side says, we'll take your number, that there ought to be an agreement. Now, I rise in opposition to this bill that's been put on the floor. which is another way to distract from the business at hand, opening up our government. And 8 days from now, our government will be in a position for the first time in history where we won't be able to pay our bills. The wealthiest nation on the face of the earth, the most credit-worthy nation on the face of the earth, will be in a position, not that we don't have the resources, not that we don't have the credit to borrow to make sure that we continue to be able to pay our bills. That won't be the case. It will be the case that we don't have the authority to do so because this Congress has not acted. I tell my friend, Mr. Speaker, who chairs the Rules Committee, and whose father served with such distinction as the head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the present head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Additional 30 seconds.
Okay. The gentleman is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
The present head, Mr. Comey, says that this sequester and budget number will deeply hurt law enforcement in this country. My friends, Mr. Speaker, I talked to my colleagues that let's defeat this bill and let's move to the business that is real, that will make a difference, not make a political point. Let us move to doing the business of America and put the people's government back to work. Not pretend that we're going to do it by some super committee. We tried that, didn't work very well. I'm sorry about that. I urge them to stay in business and do their job. So I ask my colleagues, defeat this. Move to the business of America. Put the people's government back to work.
The time has expired.
Speaker,
gentleman from Florida reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Florida reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And as the gentleman knows, there are few people in this House who I have a better relationship than I do with the gentleman from Maryland, and with great respect, I listen to him and his words. And I would say back to him, and there's a little bit more, that really comes to us from people who speak about their lives also. And I am concerned about people who are not only working for our great government and people who receive services, but we're also trying, without to make a point, we're trying to make changes in the Affordable Care Act, which is also known as Obamacare. There are several things about the Affordable Care Act that render that title almost difficult to understand, because the Affordable Care Act, within a year, this Congressional Budget Office said they believed it would be at least twice as expensive as it was originally thought it would be. Secondly, some 70% more people will be in the system because they provided a figure that did not match what they expect now for people to be in it from people who moved off of their government, off of their worker plans, their insurance plans. Third, the President stood right here, one State of the Union, and said there won't be a dime of taxpayer money. And lastly, the President of the United States said, and if you like your insurance, I guarantee you, you can keep it. But, Mr. Speaker, what's happened since then is this administration was incapable of providing information about how this would work. And even to today, after the announcement was made, people are going onto the website and learning more about these exchanges. The largest cardiology group in America, cardiologists, heart doctors, were not even included or asked to be in the exchange, not even given a chance to say no thank you. The largest cardiology group in America. So now the American people are looking at it and saying, my doctor's not even included. So who is included? Because my doctor's not. And now I am looking at this plan that's very expensive. I granted, New York City, the state of New York, was less because they had a very expensive plan, and it's true, in some places it is less. But the best doctors, or the doctors that people went to, are not even included in those plans now. As an example, as I said, the largest cardiology group, the most experienced cardiologists, the ones you'd want to go to for Medicare, for Medicaid, and for your health insurance, are not even going to be included in the government plan. So, Mr. Speaker, this is just one example about the disappointment that the American people have because they were told one thing and they're going to get something else. Because you're fighting the government, we have to do it in such a public way. If we simply followed the law and the contract or the express contract did not equal what came out the other end, you could go to court and sue for it. But you can't sue the government over this. So we are litigating this, actually, Mr. Speaker, right before your eyes in a very public way, saying that we believe this health care, known as Obamacare, should not be entered into lightly. We better understand what we're doing, and we're asking for a lot of changes. And those changes are, we think we ought to delay it, we think we ought to defer it, we think we ought to wait on it. We have, in essence, backed up every single time from our demand. And now we've gotten to the point where we, as Republicans, in our discussions through legislation with the Senate, have now gotten to the point where we've said, we are where we're going to be. Now we're going to try and open up. As soon as the government is shut down, we're going to try and open up the government, and we're going to try and make it work. That's the facts of the case, and that's just the way it is. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I thought we would hear about the working group, but it does come out in the wash. We really are here about Obamacare. I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman, my good friend from Maryland, the budget ranking member, Mr. Van Hollen.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend from Florida. And as the gentleman said, we discovered right now that the government is still shut down because our Republican colleagues want to repeal the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, when in fact we could open the government right now by passing the bill that's in our possession. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk a little bit about negotiation, because the President and the Democrats in Congress have been trying to have a budget negotiation with our Republican colleagues all year long. In fact, in March, the House passed its budget, and in March, the Senate passed its budget. And just like the textbook says, you're then supposed to have a negotiation between the House and the Senate to negotiate your differences, to reach a compromise. What happened? The Speaker of the House refused to appoint negotiators from the House. We tried 3 times to get a vote. Each time the Speaker said no. In the United States Senate, on 18 occasions, in fact 19 now, the Democratic leader and Senator Murray tried to get consent to have a budget negotiation between the House and the Senate. On 18 occasions, Senate Republicans said no. They didn't want to talk. They didn't want to negotiate. So the clock ticked until we got down to government shutdown. And then what happened? The Speaker of the House and the Senate Democratic leader had a negotiation. On Sunday on national television, the Speaker of the House told the country that he had a negotiation with Senator Reid. They'd gotten a deal. But guess what? The Speaker reneged on the agreement. Why? He told us that too. He couldn't sell it to a reckless faction of his own party. He wanted to allow that faction of the party to run the country and shut down the government. Now what are our Republicans colleagues saying? That they're not going to let us pay our bills on time unless we adopt the Republican budget agenda. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask my colleagues, and I think this is an important question for the country. If the President of the United States said that he would veto a debt ceiling bill, that he would veto a legislation to pay the country's bills on time unless Republicans adopted the President's budget and the President's agenda, our Republican colleagues would say he lost his mind. Our Republican colleagues would probably start impeachment proceedings. And yet that's exactly what they're doing. They're saying that they won't take responsibility in joining us to pay our country's bills on time unless we adopt the Republican budget agenda, unless we say let's get rid of the Affordable Care Act, unless we do everything their way. Again, if the President was to take that position, you would say he was off his rocker. So now our Republican colleagues are coming up with a fake committee where it actually sets the rules. If I could have 15 more seconds.
I yield the gentleman an additional 15 seconds.
I thank the gentleman.
Seconds.
So after all this refusal to negotiate, you now want to set up a fake committee on deficit reduction where you refuse to even include the idea of reducing the deficit in part by shutting down tax breaks for big oil companies, because you don't want to use 1 penny of revenue, even from closing tax loopholes, to reduce the debt and deficit. I hear from my colleagues how important it is to reduce the debt, and it absolutely is, but apparently it's not important enough to shut down 1 tax loophole for special interest. End this sham. Vote on the Senate bill. Open the government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Florida reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, there's some truth to this. I and the Speaker and the Majority Leader and the Whip do not, and our conference does not want to have anything that we would empower somebody to raise taxes. But we did want to empower that we would allow maybe Mr. Dingell, the Dean of the House, maybe Mr. Van Hollen, maybe Mr. Hastings, to be a part of a committee, a working group that would sit down with their colleagues and speak honestly, and maybe Mrs. Lowy, speak honestly about how we get out of this mess that we all have. And there's a working group. There's a working group with no dictates about how you've got to do what you're going to do, what time frame, except you got to go meet and you got to be successful, and it's going to be about these items. In other words, make the big deal the big deal. And the big deal right now is spending, debt, and how we do something to get this government back to work. That's what I think the legislation does. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Do it in 1:45. Our time is running out. We don't have but 2 minutes. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield to my very good friend from Michigan, Mr. Levin, 1:45 seconds.
Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1 3/4 minutes.
Well, for a week now, the Republicans said no to a CR funding the entire government unless there was defunding of health care reform. That was the bludgeon. It did not work. So the Republicans shut down the government. It turns out that tactic was in the works for a year, as described in the New York Times yesterday. I quote, "One morning in a location the members insist on keeping secret came a little noticed blueprint to defund Obamacare, signed by leaders of more than 3 dozen conservative groups. It articulated a take-no-prisoners legislative strategy that had long percolated in conservative circles, that Republicans could derail the health care overhaul if conservative lawmakers were willing to push fellow Republicans, including their cautious leaders, into cutting off financing for the entire government." So now we have a shift. Keep the government shut down. Let government not pay its bills. Why? Because the Speaker said that it would be, in quotes, unconditional surrender. That isn't what is needed. We don't need another super committee. What we need is to be allowed to vote. This poster shows 195 Democrats willing to reopen the government, 22 Republicans on record. That's a majority of the House. Mr. Speaker, let democracy prevail. Let us vote. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I'm through with my speakers, and I will reserve.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, would you be kind enough again to tell me how much time remains on either
Gentleman
side?
from Florida has 1 1/4 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Texas has 2.5 minutes remaining.
I yield the balance of our time to the distinguished gentleman, my good friend, Mr. Price, distinguished gentleman from North Carolina.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for the balance of the time.
Mr. Speaker, this debate is a bizarre experience for those of us who have been urging negotiation on the budget for a year. Take the President up on his overture of last December, we've said to our Republican friends. Let's go to a conference with the Senate and work out a budget. But the Republicans have steadfastly refused. They have run out the clock. And why did they do that? So that in a crisis atmosphere, they could demand a ransom for doing our basic duty, keeping the government open and paying our bills. Well, that's extortion, and it's way over the line. We can't do that. In fact, we need to open that government. We could do it tonight. The votes are there. If the Speaker would simply permit a vote, we could reopen the government immediately. And I promise you, once we do our basic duty, we'll be happy immediately to do what we should have been doing all along, and that is to negotiate a budget plan that puts everything on the table: revenues, entitlements, all categories of spending. A budget plan that secures this country's economic future and ends this charade that the Republicans have put us through here as the new fiscal year begins. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Excuse me. Is the gentleman done with time? Thank you.
I have no more time. I could use some of yours if you would give it to me.
I thank the gentleman. You know, some years I do want to do that. I appreciate the gentleman, my dear colleague from Florida, who has not only found time over the few years to have humor, but a good bit of wisdom with me, and I appreciate the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, we're here because Republicans want us to move forward with a process that is very important. And we've had a number of times the gentlewoman, the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, Mrs. Lowy. We've had the great young chairman from Kentucky, Mr. Rogers, chairman of Appropriations, come up to the committee and talk very clearly about their ideas about moving forward to get things done. I don't know that they would be the representatives of this body, but I bet they would be. And I bet you that they could make real progress along with perhaps maybe Mr. Van Holland and others who are awesome members on their side, members who are committed to getting the work done. But this is a fight. This is a fight. And it's a fight that goes all the way to our friends in the Senate and all the way to the President. As best I can tell you, just as I started, I will end today. And I will say that today's stalemate is the making of the President. This is his making. And he places his own political power, I believe, above the Constitution, wanting to dictate policies instead of negotiating them with a duly elected branch of government, and that's the House of Representatives. And I hope that the American people take note of what's happening. The President is different from his predecessors, not in terms of greatness, but rather to the degree in which he's willing to sacrifice this nation's greatness. He's willing to take us to the brink rather than offering his negotiating skill set and getting people together. That is what we should be about. And so, literally, the Speaker of the House has instructed us, let's get a working group together. Let's gather it on a bipartisan basis. Let's see if we can make progress, not with the President, not with the Speaker, not with the Senate Majority Leader, but among members of this body who we know and who we respect. And let's gather us together, and let's get together, and let's make a difference. That's what we're trying to suggest today. And I will tell you that my colleagues that have been here on the floor, including the great Minority Whip, I believe have the ability to make this success happen if we will work together. And that's what I'm for. I urge my colleagues to support the legislation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 373, the previous question is ordered on the bill. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. third reading.
A bill to establish a bicameral working group on deficit reduction and economic growth.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentlewoman opposed to the bill?
I am opposed.
The gentlewoman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
It's motion.
The points of order are reserved. The clerk will report.
Ms. Brownlee of California moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 3273, to the...
And to dispense with the reading.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes in support of her motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the final amendment to H.R. 3273. If adopted, the bill will immediately proceed to final passage as amended. My amendment is a simple, straightforward improvement that I believe both sides can agree is absolutely necessary, and it is also supported by the majority of the American people. If my amendment passes, it will end this reckless and irresponsible government shutdown. The majority claims that the bill before us right now will force the House and Senate to negotiate, but as written, this bill will do nothing of the sort. It will simply prolong the government shutdown. It will prolong the pain being done to our veterans, to the National Guard and Reserves, and to women, infants, and children. And most importantly, this bill will prolong the pain being inflicted on our economy. Let's be clear. This bill is a bill to nowhere. In my view, there is no one in this room right now who thinks this bill will reopen the government. Since April, the Senate has tried 19 times to request a conference with the House, but each time the request was blocked by Senate Republicans. After months of stalling and preventing a budget conference, I am amazed that my friends on the other side of the aisle want us to believe that they are ready to negotiate a budget. We have had months to produce a budget that the House and Senate could agree on. If my colleagues truly want to negotiate a budget that will move our country forward, they must vote yes on my amendment. Once we have reopened the government, we can then sit down and work out a budget for the long term. We can do this in a bipartisan manner, without our economy sinking, without our constituents being hurt. And we can do it in a manner that is becoming to this House. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that Congress must get its fiscal house in order. And I believe both sides must come together to find solutions that better reflect the values of the American people. But instead of ending the shutdown, we continue to consider bills that simply just play games. We cannot open the entire federal government one bill at a time. If we continue down this path, the government will remain closed for the next 3 months. How much damage would that do to the economy? How many veterans would go without their benefits? How many kids would lose Head Start funding? How many families would go without nutritional assistance? We cannot continue to play these games for 3 more months. The American people and the residents of my great county, Ventura County, deserve better. We can end this insanity right now. Reopen the government, spare the American people the effects of this shutdown, and then come together to resolve our differences. To put bills on the floor that pretend to take care of our nation's critical needs when they do not is shameful. I came to Congress to move our country forward, to help the families, the veterans, the small and large employers in Ventura County, to create jobs and to invest in our future. We need to end this shutdown today. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the motion to recommit.
Gentlewoman yields back the balance of her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I make a point of order that the amendment contained in the motion violates Clause 7 of Rule 16, commonly referred to as the germaneness rule. The objective of the bill under consideration is to establish a working group or deficit reduction. The amendment proposes to consider a Senate amendment to a House bill. Therefore, the amendment fails the fundamental purpose test of the germaneness described on page 547 of the House practice, and I quote, "If the purpose or objective of an amendment is unrelated to that of the bill to which it is offered, the amendment may not be held germane." Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, the amendment proposed in the motion is not germane to the bill, and I respectfully request a ruling from the Chair.
Does any member wish to be heard on the point of order?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I request to be heard on the point of order.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, doesn't the bill before us set up a commission to examine deficit reduction? My motion to recommit would open up the entire federal government so that our taxpayers can receive the benefits they have already paid for. The recommit deals with government expenditures, and right now we are running a deficit. So isn't the amount that government is spending a relevant topic to deficit reduction? Can the Chair explain why it's not germane to open up the entire federal government while we discuss deficit reduction? Mr. Speaker, if you rule this motion out of order, does that mean we will not have a chance to keep the entire federal government open today? Can the Chair please explain why we can't keep the entire federal government open?
The Chair is prepared to rule. The gentleman from Texas makes a point of order that the instruction proposed in the motion to recommit offered by the gentlewoman from California are not germane. As recorded in Section 932 of the House Rules and Manual, a general principle of germaneness is that an amendment must relate to the subject matter under consideration. The instant bill proposes to establish a working group composed of members and senators. As such, it proposes a bicameral order in the form of a joint rule. In contrast, the instructions in the motion to recommit provide for the disposition of an extant legislative measure. As such, it proposes a special order of business of the House. By addressing a different exercise in rulemaking than the pending bill, the instructions propose a non-germane amendment. The point of order is sustained.
Mr. Speaker, I appeal the ruling of the Chair.
Mr. Speaker, I move to lay the appeal on the table.
The question is, shall the decision of the Chair stand as the judgment of the House? For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move to lay the appeal on the table.
The question is on the motion to table. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, on that, I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on the motion to table will be followed by 5-minute votes on passage of the bill if arising without further proceedings in recommittal, passage of House Joint Resolution 89, and the question on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal if ordered. This is a 15-minute vote.
The House this afternoon has been debating a couple of bills, one dealing with the pay, ensuring the pay for certain federal workers. The other bill deals with creating a bicameral, that means both bodies of Congress, and bipartisan working group to work on spending issues. Democrats, in the last number of votes dealing with these sort of piecemeal pieces of legislation for funding the government, have raised the issue of trying to bring forth a motion to bring the Senate passed so-called clean CR, and they've either been ruled against by the chair or voted down by the House and have been unable to do so. So a series of votes on the House floor. We'll once again open up our phone lines for your thoughts on this 8th day of the government shutdown as the House continues to work its way through, again, a number of these mini CRs, these specific funding bills. If you're a Republican, the number to use is 202-585-3885. Democrats, it's 202-585-3886. And for all others, 202-585-3887. We'll also take a look at Twitter. We're using the C-SPAN chat hashtag. Lots of tweets this evening. We'll get to some of those as well. Did want to highlight one specific tweet from reporter Peter Baker covers the White House for the New York Times. He's reporting on the news you may have seen on the screen from the Associated Press, also saying that President Obama tomorrow, White House officials say that President Obama will nominate Janet Yellen as Fed chair tomorrow at 3 p.m. We will update you with more information as we are available to do so. Joining us from Capitol Hill by phone is Caitlin Huey Burns, who covers Congress for RealClearPolitics.com. Caitlin Huey Burns, good evening, and thanks for being with us.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Give us a look on this 8th day, heading into the 2nd week of the government shutdown. What happened today in Congress on this?
Well, there's still a significant impasse. We haven't really gotten that far away from where we started about a week ago. Both the President and House Speaker John Boehner addressed the press today in separate accounts, and they also talked to each other this morning by phone, and we still are kind of in the same place where we were before, with Democrats asking Republicans to lift the debt ceiling now, with a clean bill with nothing attached, and also reopen the government, and after that they will be open to negotiating on kind of a larger budget. Tonight, Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, brought up a bill to extend the debt ceiling through December of 2014, kind of challenging House Republicans on that. Meanwhile, Speaker Boehner has said that he will not bring a clean debt ceiling bill to the floor unless it has some kind of attachments and ways to get some kind of concessions from Democrats and the President on spending, on entitlements, and maybe some of the sequester. So they're ironing out those right now, but what we've heard from them publicly and in discussions they've had privately is that there's still a major impasse there, and they're kind of taking jabs and pointing fingers.
On the issue of the debt ceiling, you wrote about it earlier and linked on a tweet, the tweet saying not all lawmakers think breaching the October 17 deadline is all that bad. The headline on your piece was John Boehner's new headache. What's the issue facing the Speaker over in the House that you write about?
Well, there are a number of House Republicans and even some Republicans in the Senate who don't think that going over that October 17th deadline to raise the debt ceiling is all that bad, because Treasury has said that there is still about $30 billion left in the bank, left in cash to cover interest on the debt, and that could carry us through the end of the month. Some economists say that that's true, but that's a very big if. And we saw in 2011 that just the threat of going over that cliff caused analysts to downgrade the U.S. credit, and it also took trillions out of stock values that year as well, and really rattled the markets. But some Republicans say that it won't be, the end of the world that some are predicting it would be. They point to how the President handled things heading into the sequester and heading into the shutdown, and of course they haven't really, some of them are kind of insulated by their districts and haven't really seen that big of a negative effect there on those two issues.
Lastly, on the issue of messaging, because it seems like it certainly has evolved from talking about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, to now we heard a lot today from the Speaker about let's have a conversation, a lot today from the President about negotiations and talking. What are at the end of the day today, what are the messages on both sides?
Well, the real impasse here is when to get to that negotiating table. Democrats and Republicans say that they both want to negotiate, but the question is, do you do it before you lift and get past these deadlines, or do you do it after? What House Speaker Boehner is trying to show is that, he's seen the polls. Republicans are taking a hit nationwide for the shutdown, and they need to appear like they are doing something and helping people get back to work. They've passed a number of kind of small bore bills to fund certain parts of the government. And today, the Rules Committee announced went through and marked up a bill that we'll see later tonight for a vote to bring up some kind of working group to work out these issues, where you'd have several Republicans and several Democrats kind of in the spirit of the failed super committee, although Republicans have been very cautious about calling it that. They're calling it a working committee to iron out some some of these differences. But again, they want to do this before they agree to raising the debt ceiling or reopening the government. I would also note, though, that there is some talk about kind of a really short-term debt ceiling increase to kind of buy some more time. A couple of Republicans have expressed some support for that, so I would keep an eye on where that goes this week as well.
Caitlin Huey-Burns writes for RealClearPolitics.com. You can read her reporting there. You can also follow her on Twitter at CHuey-BurnsRCP. Thanks for the Congress update this evening.
Thank you, Bill.
And during this first 15-minute vote in this series, we once again open up our phone lines and hear from you on Twitter on what you think so far, where we are going into the second week of the government shutdown. Let's get to calls. Covington, Georgia. I'm sorry, Ellen's in Hermosa, Florida. She's on our Republican line. Go ahead.
I needed to ask, I have a grandson that was wounded in Afghanistan, and he's not received his check. I thought I heard last week where they passed a vote to pay the vets.
They did. They did pass that bill. He's not received his most recent check?
Right.
And is he back from Afghanistan, Ellen?
Yes, he is.
Appreciate you joining us this evening. Covington, Georgia. Next up, Valerie is on our Democrats line. Hello, Valerie.
Yes.
You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi. I wanted to say that I've been a Democrat for a while, and I've always backed the president since he's been in office. I mean, we always agree to disagree on things, but for the most part, I think that he's done a really good job. And I feel that the Republicans have really they're really making themselves look really bad in the way that the whole situation is being handled with the shutdown. And it really doesn't seem like it's that difficult for you to understand what the president is saying. And it said in his speech today about, the whole scenario of, how the Republicans are responding, or dealing with the situation. It doesn't take a genius to really to be able to understand where he's coming from.
And we're going to show you the comments of some of the comments from President Obama in just a bit. He spoke for about an hour and 10 minutes from the White House this evening. We're learning from the Associated Press and the New York Times the president is planning to name Janet Yellen as his nominee to be the next head of the Federal Reserve, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, with Ben Bernanke on his way out by the end of the year. Also, on that front, Jack Lew, the Treasury Secretary, testifying on the impending debt ceiling. He'll be on Capitol Hill Thursday before the Senate Finance Committee. Look for C-SPAN coverage. We go to John in Stillwater, New York. John's on the other line.
Hello. Thank you for letting me on. The whole thing is Barack Obama and the Vice President don't want to lose their 72% federal funding that they get from the federal government for that. The Democrats in the House and the Senate, they're trying to stop it because they want that CR 59 to come up to try and pass it. If they passed it, and if they did get the debt ceiling final, then Barack Obama and the Democrats in the Senate will not speak with the Republicans in the House. Even if they pass both things they would not do it. They're trying to stop the Democrats in the House and Senate are both trying to stop the Republicans from bringing up these small bills that they're bringing up. They're the same as whether it's on, they said they were already done. They don't want to bring it up. They want to try and stop them from having the have the president and the vice president and them go on the same market that we have to vote. We had to go through the market the same way that they should have to go. They've had 1,100 large companies that are been deferred, so they don't have to have a year to do it. Why not do that to the American people? They're violating the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, which is called the Equal Protection Clause. George Bush took Al Gore to the U.S. Supreme Court for the same reason. Now they're doing the same thing. They're violating that Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, which is everything must be unified. This is not unified because the president and is letting these large businesses go without go 1 year without doing it.
All right, John. We appreciate that. More of your calls coming up. The president did speak this afternoon at the White House, an hour and 10 minutes, a statement, and then lots of questions from reporters. A lot of it had to do with the impending debt ceiling. The president expressing his concerns over the debt ceiling deadline of next Thursday, and calling on the House to pass a clean CR once again. Here's what he had to say.
There comes a point in which, if the Treasury cannot hold auctions to sell Treasury bills, we do not have enough money coming in to pay all our bills on time. It's very straightforward. And I know there's been some discussion, for example, about my powers under the 14th Amendment to go ahead and ignore the debt ceiling law. Setting aside the legal analysis, what matters is that if you start having a situation in which there's legal controversy about the U.S. Treasury's authority to issue debt, the damage will have been done even if that were constitutional, because people wouldn't be sure. It'd be tied up in litigation for a long time. That's going to make people nervous. So a lot of the strategies that people have talked about, well, the president can roll out a big coin, and or he can resort to some other constitutional measure. What people ignore is that ultimately what matters is, what do the people who are buying Treasury bills think? And again, I'll just boil it down in very personal terms. If you're buying a house and you're not sure whether the seller has title to the house, you're going to be pretty nervous about buying it. And at minimum, you'd want a much cheaper price to buy that house, because you wouldn't be sure whether or not you're going to own it at the end. And most of us would just walk away, because no matter how much we like the house, we'd say to ourselves, last thing I want is to find out after I've bought it that I don't actually own it. Well, the same thing is true if I'm buying Treasury bills from the U.S. government, and here I am sitting here, what if there's a Supreme Court case deciding that these aren't valid, that these aren't, valid legal instruments obligating the U.S. government to pay me? I'm going to be stressed, which means I may not purchase them. And if I do purchase them, I'm going to ask for a big premium. So there are no magic bullets here. There's one simple way of doing it, and that is Congress going ahead and voting. And the fact that right now there are votes, I believe, to go ahead and take this drama off the table should at least be tested. Speaker Boehner keeps on saying he doesn't have the votes for it. And what I've said is, put it on the floor, see what happens. And at minimum, let every member of Congress be on record. Let them vote to keep the government open or not. And they can determine where they stand and defend that vote to their constituencies. And let them vote on whether or not America should pay its bills or not. And if, in fact, some of these folks really believe that it's not that big of a deal, they can vote no. And that'll be useful information for voters to have. And if it fails and we do end up defaulting, I think voters should know exactly who voted not to pay our bills, so that they can be responsible for the consequences that come with it.
President Obama from earlier today at the White House. He spoke for nearly an hour and 10 minutes. House in the middle of a procedural vote here, as Democrats have once again tried to force the House to take up the Senate CR, the so-called clean CR, the continuing resolution. It's a 15-minute vote, and they will also vote on the bill that deals with pay for certain federal employees. Just a couple of notes we are asking. One of the bills also coming up is the bill that creates that bipartisan working group or super committee. Our Facebook question earlier today asked, is a fiscal super committee necessary? Some comments, super committee, because the first super committee worked so well. That's what Wendy says. Also from William said, proud to be an American, ashamed of my government. That's at facebook.com/cspan. And before we get back to calls, a couple of tweets. First here from From Ken, who likes the discussion online. It is a good thing we can all voice our opinions even if the Congress and President won't listen but mandate us to the poor farm. Steve says, another day, another $300 million down the drain. Thank you, Speaker Boehner. Now go complain about spending. Hypocrite. And Peggy Sue says, the VA hospital system is a perfect example of what kind of horrible Medicare you get when the government controls it. C-SPAN chat is the hashtag. Linda's next. She's in Berrien Center, Michigan, on our Democrats line. Michigan, hello.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi. I'm just calling because, you know, they got to accept the fact that the president has been elected 2 times. And, you know, it seems like he can't get anything through, and it's not fair to him. And I'm just wondering why Boehner will not allow him to do his job. He can't do his job if the Republicans won't let him do his job.
All right, Sebastian's next. League City, Texas, the others line. Hello, Sebastian. Yes. Go ahead.
Yes, hello. I just wanted to comment on the parliamentary procedures right now. I think it's kind of interesting that they've suspended regular House rules and are now only letting the Speaker of the House or his appointee vote or bring a bill to the floor. I think that's something interesting and important to note.
Okay, Frederick's in Seattle, Washington, on the Republican line. What do you think about where we are 8 days into the shutdown, Frederick?
Well, we've all been watching, and I was watching a lot of C-SPAN today. The reason I'm calling today is because I saw the best speech that I think I've ever seen in my life from the senator from Oklahoma today. And it's very sad that I'm afraid that I'm going to be watching the evening news, but I doubt if he will be picked up at all.
Is this the Tom Coburn speech you're talking about?
That's correct.
Where he had the big credit card?
Well, the point is that the debt outstanding is just, it's in trillions.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable. And it's the elephant in the room which nobody's talking about. So he said that the politicians, unless they're willing to stand by what they believe and take a chance on not being reelected, that we're just going to have business as usual and that our children and grandchildren are going to be stuck with this huge bill. He talked about the fact that the government had increased by two from the 90s, and he was saying it's going to go by 4, which means that his numbers were that when those debt bills get so large, and he gave the specifics, that it's just going to be unmanageable.
And now, thank you, Frederick, on that speech. If you missed it, that was toward the end of the day over in the Senate. I believe that's what he's talking about with Senator Coburn, and you can, of course, find that in our video library at cspan.org. Let's hear from Bill in Taftville, Connecticut, as this vote looks like it's winding down. Go ahead, Bill. Hi, Bill.
My name is Bill. I'm a disabled Vietnam veteran. I'm 100% disabled, and my pension's been taken away. I'm raising a 13-year-old boy on my own. I don't know how far this is going to go. I don't know if my Social Security is going to be taken away, too. I live from day to day, from month to month. And please, open up this government. I don't care. They need to get in a room, lock both of them in a room, and let them debate and open this government up.
All right, let's hear from Alamogordo, New Mexico, and Lee on the others line.
Hello.
Hi, Lee. You're on the air.
Hi. Hi. Hello. How are you?
Doing fine, thank you.
Mine is about the Republicans here, and I just want to say several of us and the neighbors and everything, we are so proud of the Republicans and Boehner for standing up to say, hey, enough is enough, okay? Now, let's hold the president accountable for all this and for the for all this debt and everything. So why is he still allowed to go out and play golf, go on vacation, stay on his campaign trail, which is completely over? Why not help Americans? Come on, we're all suffering. We have all been through this furlough. Stop the Obamacare. It was designed, I believe, if I'm incorrect, please tell me, for those who did not have insurance. Leave the rest of us alone.
All right, Lee, let's get a couple of tweets. And first, a couple of notes on the news. The Roll call talking about what appears to be the impending appointment of Janet Yellen tomorrow, according to the Associated Press and the New York Times. Roll call saying Senate Democrats get their Fed choice, Janet Yellen. Also on Capitol Hill today, arrest, you may not be able to see this that well, the arrest number 45 protesting in support of comprehensive immigration reform included Georgia Congressman John Lewis in that group. Some comments on our C-SPAN chat hashtag. Barack Obama is 100% right, says Gregory. Speaker Boehner needs to end this Tea Party shutdown. Millie says, Mr. President, stop fear-mongering. It is time to get fiscally stronger and cut up the credit cards and stop paying the Bank of China. This vote is winding down. We'll continue your calls in the next vote, but let's listen in for the call of the vote here. On this vote, the yeas are 227 and the nays are 194. The motion is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Gentleman from Florida.
Ask the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those